I don't believe in a gold-backed reserve currency because automatically that will be manipulated anyway. Governments always manipulate. So I believe in gold being freely traded based on the physical. But as I said, that will only happen when the paper market has failed.
Please join us for our next live stream Sunday, December 18th at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll go over current events, past guests, and of course, gold and silver news. Once again, our next live stream will be Sunday, December 18th, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. Egon von Greyerz joins us today. Egon is the founder of Matterhorn Asset Management and Gold Switzerland, wealth preservation and physical precious metals specialists. And we're delighted to have Egon join us once again today. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Egon von Greyerz. Egon, welcome back to SBTV. How are you doing?
I'm excellent. Thank you very much, Patrick. Good to see you again, and always good to talk about these incredible times that we're experiencing, and it'll probably get more incredible as next year progresses.
Yeah, I completely agree. You're looking sharp, Egon. Looking very, very, very sharp.
Well,
Gotta,
it's so soon
gotta give it to
Christmas, so it's Christmas, so we're gonna have the Christmas tie, and I see you have a red tie too. So
you.
for the celebration. So yeah, no, but I'm okay. I'm lucky. I'm lucky and lucky to have a good life and good health and very interesting business activities like yourself.
Right, completely agree. And we're very lucky to have you. Egon, if you don't mind, I want to first start by asking you, how are things in Europe?
Well, you can't generalize. I mean, the interesting thing now is that the gap between the rich and the poor is so massive, and if you go to city centers, and I'm sure this is the same in Singapore as it is in Zurich or in London, and you go all the restaurants are full. People everywhere shopping for Christmas, eating in expensive restaurants. So the people who are in business or who have money, I mean, for them life hasn't changed yet because sure, stock markets came down a bit this year and bond markets came down, but it hasn't affected the lifestyle of the people who are spending money. But then you take the other side of this, you take ordinary people, whether that you take Germany or whether you take the UK, for example, people haven't got any money. They can't afford to pay for their heating, many of them. The way the energy costs have increased dramatically, and a lot of people are turning heating off or having it on just for short periods. Many people, because I spent time in the UK also, many people can't. I'm not talking about Switzerland now because Switzerland is better off, but Germany and Sweden, not Sweden so much yet, but especially the UK, there people can't afford to eat properly either. So it's affecting ordinary people, and it's the same in America. There you have exactly the same. I mean, you go to the Manhattan Midtown Manhattan or downtown, restaurants are full. You don't notice anybody being poor, but then you go out in the country and you see that people have terrible times, and of course in America also. You never see that on the news. And a lot of homeless people, a lot of people living in cardboard boxes or tents. So the difference between the poor and the rich is getting bigger, as we have seen for years now, and of course that's very dangerous because at some point, there will be a revolt against the rich, and of course governments are already leading that way with taxes are going to go up everywhere, and especially for the wealthy. But sadly, the tax base is going to be lower and lower, so the deficits will still be incredibly high because you can't make ends meet by just taxing the rich. There's not enough money there. You've got to tax everybody, but nobody else can afford to pay higher taxes. So you will have, as I said, growing deficits. And that will lead to eventually defaults in one way or another. So yes, things are you're not seeing it, as I said, from a day-to-day living point of view. But if you actually go out in the country, you hear about people everywhere who are suffering tremendously, and that's going to get worse, sadly, very sadly.
Yeah, that's pretty sad to hear. But you you said something kind of interesting where the way governments are doing things. Do you think it's going to get to a point where the governments they seem to demonize so many things, create so many narratives? You think it's getting to a point where the governments may actually start to demonize the rich?
Yes, absolutely. That will come, and the political pressure will actually force that to happen. You're seeing again, because they're it starts in the countries with the bigger problems, and with the European countries, I see the UK has major problems now. Germany also does, but in the UK now you're getting every union is now going to strike, the railway workers, for example, hospital people, nurses, and airlines or control staff, security staff at the airports, etc. So one thing after the trains, one thing after the other is going to close down or threatening strikes, and they all want 15 to 20% increases. Or up to 15, 20. And of course, that's the percentage by which their cost of living has gone up. For if you take the normal people, the poor or the people with lower income people, the inflation rate in America of 7.7 or 8%, let's say in America, and 10% in Europe, it doesn't apply to them because all of their costs are going up by much more than that, because their main costs are energy and food. And that's going up by at least 20 to 30%. So you're going to see yes, governments will have to start to tax the rich more, but as I said, that's not going to help, and therefore you will have political unrest, social unrest, and these as I said, the ends are not going to meet with this kind of deficits, and so therefore people will want more money, but there isn't any money available. And of course, as the French economists and politicians said in the early 1800s, Bastia, his name was, that everyone wants to live off the state, because every time somebody there isn't enough money around, then people say, well, the government has to pay. So everyone wants to live off the state. The problem is that the state wants to live off everyone else also. Of course, the state hasn't got any money, so they can only then tax the people. There isn't enough tax revenue to pay for all the problems we have now. So that's why we will see more money printing, and that will. I'm absolutely convinced that money printing will in 23 accelerate, because that's the only way that governments know how to deal with a problem. But as we know, you cannot solve a debt problem by more debt. So this is why we're going to go into a vicious circle, and eventually high inflation or hyperinflation is certainly on the cards, as far as I'm concerned.
If you're enjoying this interview with Egon von Greyerz tonight, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and let the algos know you'd like to see more content like this. And if you'd like to learn more about systemic wealth protection, please do visit us at www.silverbullion.com.sg. Right, and the Fed is starting to show signs that they are going to slow down. I think they're talking about maybe going from 75 basis points down to maybe 50 or so. Is this a sign that maybe come sometime next year, Q1, maybe Q2, that we may start to see QE start to fire back up again?
Yeah, I think interest rates are going to stay high. Whether it'll be 50 points now or not, that yes, that's what they say, flagging. So probably happen. But I think interest rates are going to stay high, and I think inflation will stay high, and therefore they're not. We're not. I don't expect to pivot more than a very temporary, short term maybe. But I don't expect the Fed pivoting. They're determined to kill inflation, and it's the same in Europe with the ECB. and regardless of the consequences, because they're not going to kill inflation. And remember, I lived through the 70s, and I was in the UK then, and interest rates went from, I tell this story many times, you've heard it, my first mortgage was 1973. And probably the initial rate was probably 10, 12% or so. And that was quite normal. So, you cope with that. But then it went up to 21% for a while.
Mm.
And, because you never had big debt, you couldn't borrow a lot of money. It was much sounder, lending policies then than there's now. You couldn't borrow the 95% that people borrow today. So we had high inflation and we had high interest rates, because the high interest rates don't really kill inflation. And what's causing inflation now, as we know today, is money printing, and therefore you can't kill it by high interest rates. The money printing and the creation of a couple of 100 trillion debt, global debt this century, from 100 trillion to 300 trillion debt in this century, that will have an effect, obviously, on the inflation rate. Initially, it only went to assets, as we know, into stocks, bonds, and property. But now it's spreading to the consumers and consumer prices, and that's going to continue. I think inflation is going to continue up. Never a straight line, of course. So there will be a temporary, slowdown in inflation, but then it'll start again. And the same with, therefore, with interest rates. I see interest rates going a lot higher, and that, of course, will be disastrous for a world that is so indebted that it can't afford to pay interest rates at 1 or 2%. The central banks wanted zero or negative interest rates to be able to cope with all the money they printed. But they will have, the US, for example, I can see the US interest rates going from or interest costs for the government. I mean, it's around 700 billion today. If debt goes to 40 trillion in the next 2-3 years, which I think it will do. In the US, it's 30 trillion today, 32 or 31, 32. If it goes to 40 trillion and interest goes to 5%, that's 2 trillion in just interest. That's more than 30% of the budget. You see what's happening, and that's the same in many countries. They can't afford that, so and they're not going to be able to tax to a sufficient level to cover that. So the only then solution they have is to print more money. So it's going to become a vicious circle, very sadly. In the end, it collapses, of course.
In a recent article you put out, you said that a $50 trillion U.S. debt could be on the table come 2025, 2026. Is this debt going to be out in the open for everyone to see, or is this debt going to be kind of something where the government is just going to try and squash the type of a narrative, or not really let us know what this debt truly means?
Well, they're obviously going to try everything, and if they can, and it's not that straightforward, if they can, they will create digital currencies and replace the existing currencies, the dollar or the euro, with a new digital currency. Of course, it's just another form of fiat money, so it solves nothing. But they probably put the old debt aside and go, well, the old dollar debt doesn't really count. Now we have a new currency. We'll just park that on the side. But if that old dollar debt, if people don't realize that's never going to be repaid, then they will dump all the bonds, and interest rates will go sky high on that old debt, and the bonds will become worthless. And then the assets that were financed by these bonds will also become worthless. So you can't hide the debt. It's just too big now. There was a time when countries could hide part of the debt, but when you're talking about now hundreds of trillions, it's impossible to hide because it's worldwide also. And of course, in the end, it will, as I said, lead to the money printing, and it will lead to the destruction of the currency. And that's what we've seen continuously throughout the history of the world. We've talked about many times, Patrick, that no currency has ever survived in history. Always goes to zero. This one has gone down. These currencies in this era from 71 to today. 71 was, of course, when Nixon closed the gold window. They've gone down 97 to 99%. So we're only 1 to 3% left. I keep repeating this, but because people don't understand it, nobody sees that their money in their pocket has lost in the last 50 years, has lost, if they've lived that long, 97 to 99%, because they still have the dollar, or they still have the mark, which is now the euro, or the pound, which has always been there. And they don't realize that they think that their house prices have gone up and their stocks have gone up, etc., because they never measure it in real time. If you adjust what's happened to these asset markets by inflation, nobody's made any money on anything. It's just measured in revalued worthless paper. And that's why that paper eventually will go to its intrinsic value, which is zero. And I think we're going to see that in the next few years. That will, of course, be in combination with countries defaulting. Now, whether they default officially or not, no country will if they can avoid it. America will never default, probably officially, because they will just print money. But as I said recently, if a country prints money in a currency that no one wants and creates the debt instrument that no one wants to hold, then it is basically bankrupt. Then they have defaulted. So whether they call it default or not, it is definitely a default. That's what you see when you were in hyperinflationary countries throughout history. When you have print so much money that is worthless, that is a default. If you are the reserve currency of the world, that the dollar is, and the euro to some extent also, you can keep on printing. But at some point, people will just not want to hold any of it anymore, and that's when the default comes, whatever the name they use for it.
Egon, I get asked this question a lot, so I'll forward it to you. I'll ask you the same question. People, they tend to ask, are governments or central banks, are they really losing control, or are they really, they are in control, but they're trying to take us to a different place?
Well, de facto, they have totally lost control. First of all, whatever they forecast, whatever they set to do, they don't succeed with. And that's a loss of control, totally. So you had the United States and the EU both trying to raise inflation for many years, and Japan did the same, of course. And Japan even more so by printing more money than anybody else. But also, you had, if you take the US now as an example again, so you had for 10 years almost, you had 0% inflation. And they tried to stimulate, and they printed money, etc. They didn't understand why doesn't inflation go up? Well, it did go up, as we just said, because it went up in the form of assets, bonds and stocks and property, but that doesn't, you can't measure that, or you don't measure that officially in the consumer figures. So therefore, inflation remained at zero, and then all of a sudden, overnight, it went from 0% to 7-8% in the US and 10% in Euroland, and they were all surprised. So it was temporary. So again, and now they said, that they didn't understand why it went up so quickly. They didn't believe it, and now they try to get it down again. So what I'm saying is, they have lost control totally. They have no control. They don't know what's happening. They can't. Their actions can't actually control or regulate these markets, and that's what we are seeing all the time with central banks. They're always behind the curve, because we know that whatever decisions that they take and whatever measures they take, it doesn't have any effect. The real effect is, of course, the printing of the money. That has a real effect, but they don't understand. They don't measure that as inflation. But in Austrian economic terms, it's the increase in the money supply that increases inflation. So yes, they have lost control, and of course they will lose control even more now because, as I said, the worldwide we have now an economic situation which is untenable. You have prices going up, but they're not going to come down now. Energy prices were on their way up before COVID, before the Russian invasion into Ukraine. Already started, and we had problems in the financial system, which is a spillover from obviously 2006-9, where the problems were never resolved in the great financial crisis then. So we have all of those problems, and already in 2019, banks started to worry again about central banks, about the financial system started printing money. That was in August, September 2019, and of course, COVID started at the beginning of 2020. So the problems were there before. Energy and resource stocks and resources generally has been, at a multi-decade low now, and so they were due to turn anyway. So it isn't Putin or that everybody wants to blame somebody like Putin or COVID. It was happening anyway. It's just getting worse because when things are bound to happen, always something comes up that actually makes it worse, and that's why we see, now a war, and we see energy prices now going up dramatically, and that's here to stay. But governments are not going to be able to cope with this. They're not going to be, and central banks are not going to be able to control this. So interest rates will continue up. I think the long-term trend, we had about 35 years down. And or a bit over 30 years, 31 years down of interest rates now since 1980, 81. And now they've turned, and that's going to be a long-term trend in my view. Never straight, as I said, there'll be corrections and they'll stop for a while, etc. Trend is up, and sadly, the world is going to come into a situation where when there is no solution to this, there is no solution. Central banks should be abolished anyway, coming back to them. They have no role whatsoever. The market would take care much better of the cycles in the economy, because it would happen naturally. There would be the laws of supply and demand and the laws of nature that would apply, and therefore, when there's high demand for money, cost of money goes up, and people borrow less, and the other way around. When there's no demand, cost of money goes down, and people borrow more. Low cost. And now it's the opposite. The cost of money goes to zero, and people borrow unlimited amounts, and that's what central banks cause. That's why, as I said, this is criminal what they do. It's scandalous, and that's why they should be abolished. Let the market take care of it. They would do 1,000 times better job than central banks do. And I think so. That's why they have no control, and they will not be able to control anything. What's coming now, because that's going to be much less controllable than it has been so far, because of the size of everything.
Egon, buried in so many things is the casino paper gold market and the real price of gold. How do we get to or find the real price of gold, and how do we get to what you termed free gold?
I think my view is that the fake paper markets we have now in all areas, and that includes, in my view, also crypto markets, which is, you have over 20,000 cryptos. People have hope in one, which is all the others collapse one after the other. FTX being the latest, the exchange. But what's going to happen to gold, in my view, is that these fake paper markets in every area. You take the derivative market. We've seen pension funds are going into derivative markets to actually to be able to create cash flow to pay out to the pension. And they go in to create derivative or buy derivative instruments, interest instruments, swaps, in order to get cash flow. And then, like in the UK recently, when the bond market started to move rapidly because of the mini budget the government had, in the UK, then the whole that market collapsed, and the Bank of England had to come in with 65 billion support. So pension funds are into now derivatives, and we have and there is this whole shadow market in derivatives, because the BIS, Bank of International Settlement, records and measures derivatives. They have a figure of 600 trillion, roughly. My view that we are in the quadrillions, maybe around 2 quadrillion, and we have a whole shadow banking system, which is where everything takes place, like pension funds buy from hedge funds these kind of derivatives. So all these paper markets, they are not going to survive, in my view, in the coming disorderly reset. I don't believe in any orderly reset. Whatever orderly reset, let's say the US tries, anyway, the Russia or China is not going to agree with what they do anyway. So if the US tries that, it's going to fail, it'll be very short term. So I think it'll be a disorderly reset, and then these paper markets will basically collapse. And when counterparty fails, which it will do, especially then in the derivative market, the growth remains growth, and the whatever it is, let's say 2 quadrillion, which I think could be easily the case. It was 1.3 quadrillion 10 years ago, and then they just manipulated the figures to lower them down to 600 trillion. But nevertheless, I think it's a lot higher. And when those paper markets collapse, that's when you go back to real markets. Because, of course, now it's in the interest of central banks and everybody who is playing in these markets to have these derivatives, because it is incredibly profitable for the people who know what to do with it. Because it's so much money that they can't avoid making money. Because they control the market totally, and small investors haven't got a chance against these players. So, but therefore, I think that paper market, come back here, I think the paper markets are going to fail. I've said for years, of course, that COMEX will fail one day, and I think it's getting closer to that. And of course, now also with Basel III, central banks now have to can't just keep paper gold as they used to. So that adjustment has taken a bit of place, taken a bit of time, but it's happening now. And for example, the Bank of International Settlement had a lot of gold swaps outstanding. They reduced that to virtually nothing now. So I think things are happening in the gold market that slowly is taking it back to more of a cash market. But we can only get free gold, or as I call it, or an unmanipulated gold price once that paper market has disappeared, or let's say at least the unbacked part of the paper market. Sure, if you have a gold backing 100%, there's not a problem. But if you have now 0.1% backing of real assets, then it's not going to survive. And I think that's going to happen. And of course, there will be absolute panic when that happens in most markets. And that's why, as I said, we will have a disorderly reset, because that whole derivative market, which is not gold, is Forex, it's interest rates. It's basically every stock is traded on every fund, every stock fund, everything is traded is derivatives. Very little is actually the real underlying asset. So that's going to fail in the coming disorderly reset, and then we get back to real markets. But the transition would be horrible, of course, for most people. So we will get. I don't believe in a gold-backed reserve currency, because automatically that will be manipulated anyway. Governments always manipulate, even when there's a gold-backed currency. So I'm a believer in gold being freely traded, based on the physical. But as I said, that will only happen. It can only happen when the paper market has failed and people are so worried that they will never want to hold paper gold or paper assets anymore. They want to have real assets.
If I heard you correct, if we're not seeing, let's say, gold as backing even a percentage of whatever money that they bring in, how will governments or central banks get us to have confidence in whatever new money they bring in?
Well, people won't have confidence for a long time. If currencies collapse now, nobody, as we just discussed, nobody has seen that currencies have gone down in the last 50 years by 97, 99%. Nobody realizes that, but that's what's happened. when we get the final stage and the final acceleration, when the last 2-3%, which is actually 100% from now, when that happens, then I think that will happen within the next, let's say 5 years or so. Could be quicker, could take longer, but when that happens, people that will have no confidence in money whatsoever. Not in the existing paper money, not in any digital money, which is exactly the same thing. Remember, digital money, governments can create at will, again, by pushing a button, or they can turn it off also. I tell people, sorry, no money left. You can't spend any more this month or this year. Oh, and we fine you because you've been a bad boy and crossed the streets like they do in China, and against red light. So therefore, people will not trust government money for a while, until at some point, you have a phoenix emerging, a new system based on sound values, and that will last for a while, and then it'll go, the same cycle will start again. But those are longer cycles that have always happened throughout history. But we're now due for, as I said, this disorderly reset of the system, and then a new system, and people will be very scared to own or buy anything based on paper only.
All right, Egon von Greyerz, before we wrap up, can you tell us a bit about Matterhorn Asset Management and Gold Switzerland?
Yes, certainly, Patrick. I mean, our passion is really helping people to preserve wealth. We're helping bigger investors. We have vaults especially in Switzerland, of course, and we have one of the vaults is in the Swiss mountains, Alps, and that's the biggest gold vault in the world. That's for bigger investors. But of course, so that's what we do. We help people preserve wealth, just like you do. But as I said, we pitch it slightly higher. So our Zurich vault is 400,000 minimum, and our mountain vault, which is the safest gold vault in the world, is 5 million minimum. But there are people like yourself and others who help normal people also, and that's important. Everybody should save in gold and silver, of course, everybody, because we're now due for a major rise of these metals due to the idiotic policies of central banks destroying currency. So therefore, the time now is actually to preserve your wealth, and this is what we help certain people with around the world, and like you yourself do. So if people want to come and talk to us, the best is to go to our website, goldswitzerland.com, and we'll be happy to talk to them personally, give them a ring, and tell them about what we do.
All right, Egon von Greyerz, we appreciate the time. I appreciate that nice Christmas-looking tie. And I definitely hope we can do this soon, and want to wish you again a Merry Christmas.
Well, the same to you, Patrick. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and all the best to you and your team and your family.
That was Egon von Greyerz sharing his views about the economy and gold. To learn more about Egon and his views and services, please visit www.goldswitzerland.com. If you like this video, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up to let the algos know you'd like to see more content like this. Audio-only versions of this interview can be found on iTunes and Spotify.